So we've just seen the Trump administration release its new AI plan. President Trump saying that the plan has a goal of nothing less than establishing American dominance in the field of artificial intelligence to win the AI race in the 21st century. But what exactly does that mean? What does it mean for countries like India that have innovated alongside America and now have to unpack what this plan means specifically for India. Joining us to unpack that is Vivek Chilukuri of the Center for New American Security. He's the director of the Technology and National Security Program. Mr. Chilukuri, thank you so much for joining us. Could you begin by just explaining to our viewers what Trump's AI plan was all about? It was unveiled yesterday with great fanfare. He made this big speech talking about establishing American dominance in AI. What is that plan all about?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Shashank. It's a pleasure to join you. The plan is at a high level, this is the United States putting its foot on the gas when it comes to America's AI leadership, both at home and abroad. And there's three primary pillars of it. One is outlining a bunch of steps for how the United States can accelerate AI innovation in our scientific enterprise, how we can make more high quality data available to train AI models, how we can integrate AI in ways that will accelerate innovation in the private sector and in the government. The second piece is all about AI infrastructure. So this is essentially how do we make sure that the United States has the lead in terms of building the data centers at a large scale, the energy also to power them that is required to train models at the absolute frontier of capabilities, which right now are mostly in almost all American companies for closed models, and not just to train the models, but also to operate the models. Because what we know is that, especially as we've shifted to reasoning models, the role of inference, which is basically a term that people use for what it takes to, instead of training computing infrastructure, there's inference computing infrastructure, which is what it takes to run the actual model every time you put a question into ChatGPT, for example, which people are doing more and more these days. So there's a lot that the plan does to clear the bramble of regulations, creating exemptions for data centers. The Congress actually had previously done this for semiconductor fabrication facilities through legislation. This administration is pushing the boundaries of executive authority to do that for energy and for data centers. It even goes so far as to direct agencies that own a bunch of public land, the government-owned land, to identify sites to build large-scale data centers and clear the federal regulations to enable that to happen. And then the third pillar, which I suspect will be the greatest interest to India and other countries around the world, is the international dimension. So innovation, infrastructure, international security, and diplomacy. And this one, I think, is actually really important because even though there's a lot of language about dominance, if you actually look at the substance of it, the plan has a very ambitious vision for sharing and promoting America's AI technology broadly with partners around the world like India.
So, before we get into, how the plan impacts India, I was wondering if you could sort of set the stage for us by sort of talking about the AI race that we've seen playing out. Do you see that as a race, as a competition that's been playing out between the United States and China? We've heard a lot of talk about Chinese competitors like DeepSeek, this emerging race to dominate this new technology. Could you set the stage for us? How exactly is this competition playing out? Do you see this as a race, and how well positioned is America in this race with China?
Yeah, Shashank, it's absolutely a race. I think in recent years, there's been a recognition by policymakers. It's been kind of evident in for people working in AI, in places like Silicon Valley and MIT and Carnegie Mellon, that we were on the cusp of pretty transformative technologies. And, I think the world sort of got a preview of that with the ChatGPT moment. But there's a growing recognition that these technologies are dual use, meaning they are profoundly influential for civilian and commercial purposes, but also for national security purposes. The same underlying technology that allows you or I to ask it to plan a detailed itinerary, for example, for a 10-day vacation in Kerala, could also synthesize trillions of pieces of information from satellites, from wiretaps, from sensors for military and intelligence applications. And so the country that's able to push the frontier of those capabilities could unlock tremendous military, intelligence, and economic benefits. And so there's a recognition that this is a real race, and it's a race unlike any for previous technologies because people make a lot of comparisons to the nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. There are some parallels, but this is very different because, with that, you had in the United States the Manhattan Project, which was the government paying and supporting and securing scientists in a research facility that it was had close oversight of for a technology with profound global and security implications. Here you have a bunch of private companies, largely unregulated, with some voluntary self-regulation and some insight from the government about what they're doing, again, mostly on a voluntary basis, developing and racing to develop technologies with profound geostrategic implications. So it's a completely different dynamic and one that is going to, I think we're all in for a bit of a ride here.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit also, Vivek, about what we're seeing in terms of how well positioned America is in its competition with China? Do
Yeah.
you believe that America still holds the card in that competition with the Chinese? Because, if you look over at China, the DeepSeek moment that they're talking about, which is a
Yeah.
Chinese company, DeepSeek, coming out, releasing a powerful AI model that performed extremely well. That put a lot of wind in the sails of Chinese companies, prompted a stock market rally, the sense in among the Chinese that no, actually, we can compete and challenge America for dominance in AI. Do you still believe America is the number one power when it comes to AI, that it remains the best positioned country to dominate AI in the future?
Absolutely. I think, I don't think that's a reason for complacency, but I think that if you look at a few dimensions, what are the most important inputs for AI? When you think one of the most important ones is the chips themselves, right? And there's no country in the world, and frankly, no company in the world that is developing chips that are extremely capable both for training and memory compared to what NVIDIA is producing. And because of America's legal authorities and control over the chip supply chain, because the technology used to design these chips are American, we're able to regulate the global flow of these chips. As you mentioned earlier, Shashank, with the diffusion rule, which has now been rescinded, but the Biden administration put that in. So the United States essentially has a chokehold, to be blunt, over the global dissemination and global access to the cutting edge chips you need to train the best AI models. That is an enormous advantage. And so that's one. And two, capital really matters. So these chips are very expensive. And the current model of training AI essentially requires that you throw more and more chips, you network them together. With more and more high quality data, which requires just a ton of money, not only for the chips themselves, but for the energy and the facilities required to power them and operate them, and the talent, of course, to do all the work on the back end. I mean, two-thirds the cost of a data center is are chips, and as global demand for these advanced chips explodes, that cost is only increasing. And so the United States has enormous advantage here because we have private capital that is willing to make these long-term investments, that sort of understands the opportunity of AI. Now, you have to compare that with China's model. China has plenty of money, and they're willing to throw state money, often at a loss, in service of long-term strategic objectives like AI. The challenge is they don't have the chips, right? And so we've seen issues with chip smuggling, where China is able to buy export control chips on the black market. They're able to make use of legally purchased chips like the H20, for example, sort of the fourth most powerful NVIDIA chip, which is actually still quite useful for AI. I must say AI inference to catch up. But I think the conventional wisdom right after DeepSeek happened, Shashank, to answer your question, is that okay, America spent all this money and put up all these controls on China, and China has sort of with DeepSeek rendered all of that irrelevant. I think that misses some important dynamics. To be clear, DeepSeek's innovations are impressive, and no one should underestimate the talent and the innovation in China's AI ecosystem and the government's ambition to close gaps with the United States and eventually surpass it. And I don't think policymakers in Washington, Delhi, or anywhere else should be naive about the possibility that that could happen in the next several years. With that said, the fact that NVIDIA stock has rebounded after it lost $1 trillion in the DeepSeek moment suggests that it points to a bigger point that I was referencing earlier, Shashank, which is what we're seeing is that computing infrastructure still matters. The country that's able to throw more chips and money into big data centers is able to train the more powerful AI models and reap the economic and military and security benefits that come from that. And the United States is still able to do that in a way that China can't. I mean, there was reporting that DeepSeek had to limit access to its application, which it made to its model, which it made available through an API, because presumably because it didn't have the computing infrastructure to actually process all of the growing requests. That's an issue for any country, but it's definitely an issue for China. They're, not able to produce nearly as many chips annually as the United States and its allies, and the chips that is producing are not at the same level of quality. That could change, but that is the reality right now, and it's why the United States is in a strong global position.
Understood. So, Vivek, you set the stage for us. So let me ask you about something you just wrote yesterday when the AI plan had just come out. It was a piece of analysis that I saw and I found very interesting, where you said that America clearly dominates, every level of the AI stack. You said that, of course, we should look to export that technology abroad. But to quote from what you were saying, but words matter, and there's a tension between publicly calling for dominance on the one hand and seeking to ensure our allies are building on American technology. We've already seen anxiety in foreign capitals about dependence on US cloud providers. This will surely continue for AI. They worry about Washington's weaponization of its economic leverage in the trade domain, and that will continue in the digital one. So that's what you said yesterday. Could you explain to our audience what you were trying to say there about fears around the world that, what we've seen with trade and the Trump administration using tariffs? Could we see that also in the digital domain? Because as you say, America is well positioned to dominate the future of AI development.
Yeah, thanks, Shashank. I think, yeah, like I said, words do matter. And even if our internal policy goal as the United States is to secure and extend the lead that we have with AI, which I've already described, when you're going around talking about dominance, right? I mean, that may play well to a domestic audience, but perhaps that wants the United States to have the lead in such an important technology. But there's not just the American audience. On the one hand, if you're calling for global dominance, and on the other hand, you're calling for the world to buy only American or mostly American technology, there is a tension there. And what I mean is um, the willingness of other countries and companies to enter into long-term technological dependencies on anyone, including the United States and US companies, is a function of their trust that you're not going to weaponize that dependency in the future, right? I mean, one of the reasons the United States is going around and has gone around since the first Trump administration and told countries all over the world not to build Huawei and ZTE equipment into their telecommunications infrastructure is we're worried about the leverage that confers on Beijing economically, and to say nothing of the data that risk that it poses. It's hard for us to make that argument when we are at times in the trade domain using the leverage that we have through decades of economic interdependence and open trade with countries like Japan, South Korea, India, and frankly, at most countries in the world, and exerting that leverage through what I would argue in some cases are capricious and punitive tariffs.
Mhm.
And so I guess the point is a trade partnership that's long term is a function not just of how good your technology is, it's a function of how much there is trust in the bilateral relationship and durability and stability and predictability in the bilateral relationship. With that said, I mean, the countries don't have a lot of other options. Like, unless India or the European Union or others are prepared to throw in their lot with China's AI ecosystem, which I think would be a profound mistake, they really only have the United States as an option right now. I think we should just, as policymakers, they would be wise to be a little careful with their words, right? Countries are looking for partnership. They understand that America has the best technology and advantages in a lot of these areas, but they don't want to be dominated by the United States. They want to be in partnership with sort of equal footing and respect and building capacity around the world. And I actually think, separating the rhetoric of the action plan from the substance of it is important. The rhetoric around dominance, I would argue, isn't particularly helpful, but the substance in Pillar 3 around promoting the full stack of AI offerings to the world and actually putting some meat on the bones in terms of what the US government can actually do to support that promotion is super useful and welcome.
So, Vivek, you've pointed out an important tension that countries like India are thinking about at this point in time. A lot of India's best startups. I know some people who are in the AI field in India, and their views, of course, yes, that they rely a great deal on the American stack. But India, of course, is also looking to back its own AI startups, develop AI for India, and is also trying to ensure that it has its own stakes in this race and can add value in its own right. Isn't someone that's just taking technology from America. What does this plan have for a country like India that wants something like that? You're also probably familiar with what other countries are doing in terms of the AI stack. How does this work out for India? If America wants dominance and India wants a stake in the race as well, how does that work?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's some interesting and kind of wonky details in the proposal that might be of interest. So they are going to pilot through the Department of Commerce this idea of industry consortia. So essentially, American companies, so it might be some combination of NVIDIA, which is providing the chips and the software to access them, with companies that might be American or others that are offering applications, training, other parts of the stack, right? So, the ability of a company like Scale AI, for instance, to go in and work with an Indian partner, whether it's in government or in industry, to actually tailor some of these advanced AI capabilities to their particular needs, whether it's improving their logistics, improving their HR hiring and screening, improving their ability to do internal accounting and financing and auditing. I mean, those all the applications are essentially endless. But what the AI action plan suggests is that the Commerce Department will be reviewing applications of sort of comprehensive packages from these industry consortia. So instead of making one-off deals with different American companies for different parts of the AI ecosystem, they will be evaluating an entire package that then could be offered to another country like India or sectors within India, which could be very attractive and also meet not only what the Indians would want in this case in terms of their economic needs and training needs and other aspirations and respect for their data and security, but also respect for American technology. I think this is an important lesson from what the United States and its allies got wrong in the transition to 4G and 5G, where Chinese companies like Huawei were extremely effective at going, in particular, to emerging markets and not just offering telecom hardware as for countries that wanted to improve their connectivity, but the financing to make it happen, the maintenance, the software on top to run it, ongoing operations, and all. And now, frankly, they're bundling AI and cloud services on top of that, which is another part of this story. So I think the United States has woken up to that reality and is trying to make a comprehensive offering that's consistent with a private sector model as well.
Right. Vivek, one thing that's also caught a lot of attention, both in India and here in America, is the stipulation that the AI plan has that AI models must be free of ideological bias. And some people have raised some concerns about that. What does that mean exactly? It very much seems that, the Trump administration is saying something about AI models not being biased against conservatives in particular. How does that impact the development of AI as a technology? How does that impact AI models, for example, that Indian companies and countries around the world will use? There have been some concerns about whether this is actually possible, what the Trump administration seems to be asking for. Your view?
Yeah, I'm deeply skeptical. This is one part of the plan where I raised my eyebrows and I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm not sure how this is going to stand up to legal challenges. There is kind of an irony in the government deciding what represents an ideological bias or not. That is inherently a subjective judgment, and it implicates the First Amendment of the United States. So I just don't know how that's going to stand up to legal challenges, and I suspect it will not. And so as a result, I don't think India over the long term will have much to worry about.
So, Vivek, there's a final question that I want to ask you about Trump's policy really on AI, which is that at one level, there is this massive welcome that this plan has gotten from major AI companies. NVIDIA has welcomed it, Palantir has welcomed it, Google, Meta, and Amazon have welcomed it. So they're very happy about what's happened. There's some people on the AI safety side saying that, look, this plan by cutting regulation is jeopardizing AI safety. We don't know how these technologies are going to develop. What does this mean exactly? Where do you stand on this debate about AI safety versus letting the AI companies do what they need to do to establish American dominance?
Yeah, I don't know that I entirely agree. The reaction that I've seen and my own personal view is that it actually strikes a pretty reasonable balance. And I think if you were to summarize the way that this plan thinks about risks and safety questions, it's not dismissing them. It's essentially saying, let's wait and see, and let's remain vigilant for cyber, biological, and other risks at the frontier. Let's invest in areas like interpretability and explainability. I mean, the way these advanced LLMs actually work amazingly remains a true, like the actual inner workings of it remain a mystery, even to the companies developing them, which is kind of an extraordinary thing to say. But accountability for the AI models, if we're going to be deploying them widely, especially in government context and national security context, we need to be able to understand why it's making decisions, especially when things go wrong. And this administration calls for investing in areas like explainability, robustness, and interpretability. That's a good thing. There was a lot of speculation that this administration would axe what used to be called the AI Safety Institute. They've since rebranded it and they've directed it to focus on, for instance, the bias in Chinese open source models like DeepSeek that may not answer people's questions about human rights abuses or Tiananmen, but they haven't gotten rid of it. They haven't said it can't work on some of these other issues. So I think some of the look, some I understand some of the reaction. It is a bit odd that we're in a world where companies are essentially self-regulating, era-defining technologies with huge national security implications. But I think the administration, at least for the moment, is saying the technology is too early to for Washington, which is not particularly sophisticated at regulating this stuff. Trust me, I worked in the Senate for 6.5 years. To let's wait, let's remain vigilant, let's improve mechanisms for industry to share what they're seeing with government. Let's build capacity within government to prepare for an incident with AI if it goes wrong. But let's not overregulate something we don't really understand and that's not quite mature enough yet. Let's actually deploy it. Let's have test beds. Let's have sandboxes. Let's see how it exists in the wild and then react to risks as they actually arise.
Right. Vivek, my last question to you
Yeah.
is that from the Biden administration, we saw that the policy was very much that a slightly restrictive policy to exporting, let's say, high technology chips to the Chinese to basically ensure that they could not challenge America's position in high technologies. The Trump administration, of course, there was also the AI diffusion rules, which India did not very much appreciate, which basically restricted the amount of compute power that India, for example, could access. The Trump administration seems to have taken a different approach. It wants to export America's stack abroad, export American technologies abroad. But there's also the charge that, by allowing companies like NVIDIA to export their chips to China now, which just happened a little while ago, that you're doing all these good things to establish American control over this technology, but you're also sort of slipping up on some of the key things that the Biden administration did that might actually have worked, which is basically restrict China from gaining access to top quality American chips. Your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has to be two approaches to any serious strategy that wants to protect America's AI leadership. You have to run faster and you have to slow down your competitor, which in this case is China. And this plan, in theory, does the first piece quite well, right? It accelerates the infrastructure side, it increases adoption, it focuses on international promotion. All that stuff is all well and good. The decision that the Trump administration made, I guess, just in the last few days to reverse its own decision not to sell the H20 chips to China, which is not part of the AI action plan, but is obviously part of the administration's broader AI policy making, I think is a mistake, right? I think the administration could have come in and said, look, we don't agree with the Biden administration's chip restrictions. We think that China should have access to these chips. But the Trump administration itself imposed export controls on the H20 chip, only to reverse itself and potentially, even though it's hard to confirm this, but in exchange perhaps for some concession in the trade and other domain, which is really tricky because we've justified export controls on advanced chips for national security grounds, and because they have a national security justification. When counterparts from Beijing say want to negotiate around that, we said we don't negotiate around national security considerations. Well, it seems like we might be negotiating over national security considerations, so it undermines our credibility to make this case. And even though the H20 is not the most powerful chip, it's still incredibly useful for AI adoption. The fact that orders for the H20 have seemed to have surged from China suggests that they see enormous value in it. And the AI race is not just about who can build the most capable model. That's a dimension of it. It's also about who can adopt it broadly in their economy and who can get the rest of the world to adopt their technologies and their rules and standards. And a huge function of that is, do you have the computing infrastructure to process global demand for your AI services as they expand in the world? And the H20 is very useful for that.
Right.
And we've made
Vivek,
it
I'm sorry.
easier for China. Yeah.
But yeah, Vivek, I'm so sorry because I said I'd ask you last question, but this is my final
Well,
question.
that's fine. Go for it. Yeah. You're not
Yes,
letting me
no.
procrastinate from something I have to write. So this is great.
So let me just ask you this then. You were talking about countries like India and the concern that they may have about American dominance, about the weaponization of technology. We've seen China weaponize its sources of technology as well. So it seems that many countries around the world are caught in this position where there is this fear that the two superpowers that are dominating this technology could use it at some point in time for some form of weaponization or for some form of geopolitical leverage. What does a country like India do? You've tracked the this space closely enough. What does a country like India do? What do countries like India do as they develop this technology because they want to reap the benefits of it? What do they do to sort of hew a middle path to develop their own capabilities in this race for AI? What would be your recommendations?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And look, the concerns that countries like India or the European Union or others have about potential American weaponization of our tech leadership, I can understand why those concerns exist. When I think about the actual possibility of America doing that and what that would actually look like, I struggle to see it a little bit, to be honest with you, just because, right, American companies themselves, which are influential in Washington and this administration, they no one would suffer more than countries around the world concluding that they cannot enter into long-term partnerships with Microsoft and OpenAI and Nvidia than those companies because they're worried about this weaponization problem. Does that make sense, Shashank? So
Yeah.
I actually don't, even with this administration, don't see if you are a close partner and friend and share democratic values with the United States. I don't really see a long-term serious risk in entering into technology partnerships with the United States. I can understand why people are anxious about it, especially with the way this administration has behaved in other domains. But remember, this is a longer relationship than 3.5 years, and this is a generational sort of challenge to adopt this technology and build ecosystems that are consistent with our shared democratic values. So, what does India do? I think is your question. Look, I can understand why India would want to develop its own models and national champions for AI. With that said, it's extremely, extremely expensive. It's extremely hard. India could throw, hundreds of billions of dollars at this, and it would take a long time with an uncertain outcome. And so there's a question about whether that's the highest and best use of limited private and public capital. My suggestion would be to actually partner with these American companies, but be clear about areas of, where data sovereignty is important, where you're partnering to make sure that the models are have fluency in local languages and local customs. I mean, the AI models reflect, of course, the norms and biases of the data that they're trained on, and you're going to need Indian partnership to make sure that, whether a model is being used in Telangana or Himachal Pradesh or wherever, that it reflects not only local languages, but idioms and nuances. And that's not stuff that American companies can do on their own. And they're going to need partnership with India to do that. And they have an interest in partnering with Indians to do that. And I think at the software and application level, at the startup level, drawing on open source models, there's just a ton of opportunity. India has vast talent to take advantage of this moment. So I think the stack has plenty of opportunity for India to contribute. It may not be at the frontier, at least in the short term, but there's a lot short of the frontier that's going to be incredibly important and influential because, we pay all the attention to, okay, who's got the most powerful model, but, not everybody needs the most powerful model. And as the models become increasingly capable, even the third or fourth best model can still do a lot. And people who are thoughtful and innovative about how to apply them in discrete ways in industry and business and academia and research, there's a ton of reward to be gained there. And I think there's no reason India can't be contributing in that way.
Right. Vivek Chilukuri of the Center for New American Security joining us here on HT to explain America's new AI plan and what that means for the US-China competition, as well as for countries like India in the race to develop artificial intelligence. Thank you so much, Vivek.
Great. Thanks, Shashank.